Hey everyone, Mr. Tweet here, and today I'm going to go over what is included and not included in GDP using just this pencil, right? So, first thing is what is included in GDP? Um, we have the acronym CIGX to help us remember everything that's included in GDP. The first and biggest part of GDP, like 70% of GDP, is consumer goods. So these are things like that are made for households to use and consume. So like if I go to the store and I buy a pencil for my family to use for, my kids that want to do some art and they want to do a sketch and they're going to use this pencil, that would be a consumer good. Somebody going to the store, buying something for their family to use. The second part of what's included is the I in SIGIX, investment, but you probably should think of it as business spending. So like if I own a business, I might decide to buy some pencils for my employees to use to keep track of like sales data, right? The assumption there is that the reason why it's called investment is because if I'm a business, I'm buying this pencil because I think it's going to make me more money than it's going to cost me. That if buying pencils cost me more money than my employees could make with them, I wouldn't buy pencils. So business spending, because businesses spend money to make money, it's called investment. But business spending, that's the second thing that counts for GDP. The third is if, like, for instance, the government bought this pencil and they were going to use it to have like census workers go take down information about who lives where for the census. Anytime the government buys goods and services and then uses those up, that would count towards GDP as well. Because remember, we're trying to count total production. So whether this pencil is, bought by a family or a business or by the government, we want to include it. The last category is net exports. Now, if this pencil was produced in the United States, but then it was shipped and sold in Canada, we'd still want to include it, right? We want to include our exports because if we produced it, we want to count it as the measure of our production. What we don't want to do is we don't want to count it if it was made in Canada to be sold here in the United States. Actually, this one was made in Britain. I don't know if you guys can see that, but made in Britain. But anyways, if it was already included in the total and then we learned it was made in Britain, we'd want to subtract that from the total. If it hasn't been included yet, then we can safely ignore it, all right? So those are imports, things that were made in other countries that was bought in the United States. We wouldn't want to include that for the United States GDP. We would want to include this for England, though. So we'd want to add this back to England's total for their GDP because that's where it was produced. So those are the four categories of things that we include: consumer spending, business spending or investment, government spending, and then what we call foreign spending, adding in our exports, but not adding in the things that we purchase that are imports. Now, there are other things that we don't want to include as well. The first one is intermediate goods. So if this thing has not reached its final destination yet, if this pencil is being sold from a pencil making company to another company that puts together art kits, and then the art kit company is going to sell their art kit to some family or to some business, we wouldn't want to include it the first time. We only include things the last time they get sold. So when Goodyear sells tires to Ford, we don't include that, only when the final car is sold. When the pencil company sells this pencil to a larger art kit making company, when the art kit company sells their art kit, that's when it's included in GDP. We also don't want to include used goods, right? So if I went and I decided to sell this pencil to one of my students, right, because they didn't have a pencil and they were like, oh, Mr. Tweet, I need a pencil. And I'm like, all right, $1 for this pencil right here. It's a used good, right? It was already included in GDP the first time it was bought. And remember, GDP measures production. So if we counted it again, it would look like we made two pencils when we only made one. So we don't include used goods in GDP either. We also don't count non-market transactions. So for instance, if I was to make a pencil for my kids, right? If I was to, I don't even know where graphite comes from, mining it or whatever, but if I was to make a pencil for my kids, that wouldn't be included in GDP. Even though it is production, we don't include those non-market things because there's no record of those transactions, right? There's no, the market hasn't valued that good or service through dollars, and so we don't count that, even though maybe it is still productive. We also don't count black market activities. So if somebody was illegally producing pencils and then selling those illegal pencils, that wouldn't be included in GDP either, because there's no way of keeping track of the level of production. Because remember, production is measured in dollars. And so if it's illegal and it's not happening, then there's no way to keep track of that. So black market things don't count either, even though that probably is real production as well. Some economists estimate that the United States economy, that up to 1/11 of our economy happens in the black market. And then finally, financial transactions don't count. So what an example of that would be like if I said, you give me $5, I'll let you hold on to my pencil, and then in 2 weeks, I'll give you the $5 back. You give me the pencil back, right? So like a bond or a loan or a stock or real estate, none of those count because nothing's being produced in that transaction, right? I give you the pencil and then you give me a loan or something like that, doesn't work. So financial transactions also don't count for GDP. So again, what does count? Consumer spending, investment, which is business spending, government spending, net exports or foreign spending. What doesn't count are intermediate goods, used goods, and financial transactions where nothing's being produced, and then illegal things like black market and non-market activities, like when you do something in your own home. For instance, washing your own car doesn't count. So anyways, those are the things that do and do not count for GDP. See you guys in a little bit.